turn down the master. Right down at the bottom. Right there. Just turn it all the way down. All right. I heard that. Okay, now it's on. Now you turn it back. Test, test. Okay. Too much. Test, test. 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Everything's working for you?
Yeah, maybe this a little bigger.
Well, the problem is that I can't get the HDMI cord any longer.
Do you mind scooching forward a tiny bit?
I mean, yeah, we can.
You can finagle that.
Sure. I mean, might as well close it.
That's good. Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. Excited that you all already found your seats. That's wonderful. Because you don't want to get lost or anything. So exciting. We have Jake here for our penultimate, which is sadly our third of 4 talks this summer with our seminarian. So I'm excited to learn with you guys about logic, which is super exciting. It takes me way back to an honors logic and rhetoric class I had in high school. So, symbolic logic. Please crack that out for me, please. A couple of brief announcements. Yeah, that's right. A couple of brief announcements. Next week, obviously, is Jake's last talk with us, which is going to be on the philosophy of science, which is pretty exciting as well. But before we get there, come back to this room on Saturday after the Vigil Mass for our next Benedict XVI lecture with Stephanie Lassiter talking about Deus Caritas Est, which is a wonderful book by Pope Benedict. So that'll be a wonderful time to join us for that as well. And a couple of things I want to invite you to as well, if either for yourself or someone you know is either interested in learning more about the Catholic faith or is interested in becoming Catholic. Our Introduction to Catholicism begins on August 23rd. So that'll be the first of our information sessions. You can come to that and learn more about it and register. If you're curious about that, I can give you my business card, which has my email on it. You can ask questions there or here. Or if you want to pass my information on to someone you know, that would be exciting. I'd love to connect with them. I'm a convert, as most of you know, and this process is really, really special and important to me, so I'm happy to accompany that journey with anyone who's kind of going through that with us. So that'll be fun. The next thing is, for those of you who are Catholic that want to dive a little bit deeper into the fundamentals of the faith, our basic catechism course with the Father John Hardin's basic catechism course will be beginning an information session in here Monday, August 7th at 7 p.m. So if you want to know more about that, you can come for that. And without too much more belaboring, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Jake.
Well, I want to thank you guys all for being here once again. So my name is Jake Nadeau, if this is your first time, and I put out my handout again, Seminary for Dummies, if you haven't gotten one yet and you want to learn more about kind of how seminary works. That's kind of my basic rundown of it over there. And since this is my only talk that I'm using a PowerPoint, I thought I could show you some pictures to illustrate. So this is where I live in Washington, D.C. So if you've ever been to the March for Life or the National Basilica, this is across the street from it. But a lot of people don't notice it. But yeah, so it's kind of this castle thing here. I live kind of on the right side over there, so my window just faces a bunch of trees in the street over there, so I don't have as good as a view. But you'll also notice, so that green building in the top right corner, that's the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. So that's where they meet for other meetings, and they do stuff like putting out the readings for Mass, and they have rights to the catechism and everything like that. So it's a very Catholic area kind of there, right in the middle of D.C. And so like I said, if you've been to maybe the March for Life, or you may have seen the National Basilica Shrine of the National Conception. So it's one of the biggest churches in America as far as the church building, and that's the other side of the street there. And you'll also notice, so again, the top right corner over there, so that's Catholic University. That's some of the school buildings over there where I have classes. And yeah, so that's where I live during the school year. And here's some kind of seminary happenings. So a lot of people wonder kind of what kind of stuff we do, maybe for fun. So to the left, we have our annual soccer tournament. It's called the Vianney Cup, and it's when we play a soccer game versus 3 other seminaries. So it's us, St. Mary's in Baltimore, St. Charles Borromeo in Philadelphia, and Mount St. Mary's in Maryland. So the 4 of us play a tournament. So there's me on the soccer field with Father Matthew Gray, who's a priest from the Diocese of Charleston. And yeah, that was in the middle of the game. Mount St. Mary's is much bigger than the other seminaries, so they've won something like 15 out of the 16 years we've played or something like that. So they cheat if you ask me, but don't worry. And to the right, so this is a party that we kind of had for the Feast of St. Marin, which is a Maronite feast day. And you can kind of see some of the different religious orders and seminarians that live in the area. So this first guy on the left, he's a Maronite. So Maronites are Lebanese, Eastern Catholics. So that's his cassock there. And then behind him, the guy with the glasses, that's a Carmelite. Other 3 guys toward the back, those are Capuchins. A couple of them actually lived with, I forget, it's just blanked on his name. The guy that just converted, who was in Holes and Transformers and everything, the actor. What's his name? I don't know. They lived with him, basically. And then there's me in the back right, Diocese of Charleston. And then in the front right over here, you have an Oratorian. So yeah, a lot of different seminarians, religious orders, they all live in the area. They all have their own houses. So it's kind of a cool Catholic community that we have there. So without further ado, this talk obviously is on logic. And yeah, so one of the reasons I love this class so much is because the professor was just awesome. He really made me love logic. I didn't know that I could love it so much. A lot of people, logic is kind of their least favorite class. But this guy was just awesome. He was hilarious. And he would just go off on these random tangents every class, just about random things like priests he used to know back in the day who knew like 10, 12 languages, or like before technology when people's memories were better and they would just memorize stuff all the time. And it was just really fascinating, really interesting. But the biggest thing was he just really believed in the human mind to be able to know things. And he would always say, you know, it's not just about your grade in the class, but actually learning the stuff in it and spending time on it. And he was saying, you might be terrible at this class now, you might be terrible at logic now, but if you keep trying, then you're going to get it. It might be in this class or it might be afterwards, but eventually it's going to click for you. And he would always say, the only difference between me and you guys is like thousands of hours of practice. But you can learn the stuff. And sure enough, I kind of learned to love it. And so one of the things he'd always talk about with logic is how every occupation really uses logic, whether you like it or not. Whether you're a lawyer, a doctor, a soldier, a priest, there's all moments where you have to know how to think, right? And that's where logic comes in. So yeah, that started really clicking with me as I was taking this class. And then I remember one time at the very end of the semester, a bunch of seminarians and we went out to dinner somewhere, and they started having a talk about evolution and whether or not we should believe in it. And I'm not super well versed on that topic, but they were all talking. And those guys are like really smart. So they're going back and forth. They're giving, just reason after reason and going back and forth. And then I started noticing that there was form to the argument that they were giving. I was looking at it, I was like, wait, he just used a modus tollens, and then he just used a syllogism. And, it was just fascinating that we don't even realize it, but anytime that you're making an argument, arguments always have form. So that's one of the things we learned in this class. That's something that Aristotle said 2,000 years ago. Arguments always have form. They might not fit into the conventional forms that we're going to discuss today or anything like that, but they always have some kind of form to them, just as if a shape has a form, or a human being has a form, or an animal, or something like that. All right, so now getting into it. So the types of logic that we talked about in this class, so the first one is Aristotelian syllogism, syllogistic logic. So that's the first type that we talked about. We didn't do symbolic logic, so I'm sorry about that, Michael Sandifer. This was a really intro class. Okay, so getting into that. Oh, okay, I almost forgot about this. So Billy Joel said this, right? Okay, this was a song. So this was a joke that my professor always liked to make. He's talking about how logic is just everywhere, right? Everyone's making arguments. You might not even realize it. So Billy Joel is making an argument in the song saying, only the good die young. Now, however, what Dr. Noon, the teacher, was telling us is that, so obviously you may know the song. It's about this guy. He's trying to make advances on this Catholic schoolgirl. But what Dr. Noon told us is that the girl, Virginia, rejects Billy Joel. And the reason why, she went to Catholic school, and she took logic at her Catholic school. So only the good die young equals all people that die young are good. Now, is that true? False. So Virginia rejects Billy Joel. So just kind of silly jokes like that always just made me love this class. But so anyway, in conclusion, not everything has an argument, right? So sometimes you're just having a normal conversation, but a lot of times they do. So here we go. So Aristotelian syllogistic logic is the first type that we talked about. And something that Dr. Noon really impressed on us is how much logic really is a skill course, right? So there's not that much material that you have to memorize. I'm pretty much going over all the memorizable material in the whole class in this whole section, and it's not going to take me that long. But it's all about skill, right? You need to look at examples, you have practice. It's like math or language. You just kind of get better at it over time, and you have to follow certain rules, basically. So I'm going to go over, some examples and everything. I may ask questions. You can just nod your head, yes or no. Okay. So, a syllogism, how many premises are a syllogism? Does anyone know? Can you just hold up the number? Okay. So, syllogism has first premise. For example, all fruits contain seeds. Second premise, all bananas are fruits. Conclusion, 3 premises, always. No matter where you are, syllogism always has 3 premises. You take the first 2 and you combine them to make the conclusion, right? So, as you can see, all fruits contain seeds, all bananas are fruits. And so use the fruit. So fruit is what's called the middle term that kind of links them together. And then we can conclude that all bananas contain seeds, okay? Now, I think what's really interesting, what's really powerful about this is that in this form of logic, if these first 2 premises are necessarily true, then the conclusion is necessarily true every single time. And I think that's a really powerful thing because a lot of times, in this day and age, we kind of hesitate to say anything is true. We kind of, I don't know. But these are all true. Therefore, the conclusion, bananas contain seeds, it's true. So some things are true and some things are false, and that's the way it works. Now, also, though, you have to always have a valid form, right? So the syllogism has to kind of fit these specific rules. Okay, so it has to be valid. So if it's valid, that means the premises guarantee the conclusion 100% of the time, no matter what. And then there's soundness, right? So these two are different. Soundness is whether or not they guarantee the conclusion, it's the valid form, and the premises are actually true. So a syllogism can be valid, but not actually true. So I might show you some examples of that. Now, as far as the validity of a syllogism, so here's another one. Okay, first premise, all pigs are breathers of air, right? So we can probably all agree with that. It's probably true. All politicians are breathers of air. All politicians are pigs. Okay, now, we look at the syllogism. Okay, the first two premises are true, right? The conclusion, it kind of depends on who you ask, right? But is it valid or not? Does it fit the valid form? Yes or no? Okay, yes. No, it's invalid. So the reason why, we'll get into. So this is called the egregious, evil, malicious fallacy of the undistributed middle term, right? Okay, absolutely pure evil right here. So the rule is the syllogism. We'll get into why, okay? So number one, the middle term must be distributed at least once. So like I said, the middle term is the one that kind of connects the two premises. It is in both of them. It's the same term. I'll go into what distributed means in just a second. And then the second rule is if a term is distributed in the conclusion, it must also be distributed in the premise where it occurs, right? Okay, so these are the four different types of premises that you have in a syllogism. So always it's going to be one of these four that the premises go into, right? So you have all blank or blank, some blank or blank, no blank or some blank are not blank. So the premises are always going to be one of these four. And so the big circles I created are the ones that are distributed. So distributed means, it's universal. It applies to you're saying something about every single individual in that term, in that category. So we're saying all humans or no humans, basically. Okay. So if you're going back to the previous example, I said all pigs are breathers of air. All politicians are breathers of air. Notice how I never applied breathers of air I never said all breathers of air, or I never said no breathers of air. So it's not distributed. So you can come up with all kinds of faulty logic if you do that, right? So I could have said anything with that, but it was invalid, not true. All right. So we're going to look at another example. All mammals are bearers of live young. All humans are bearers of live young. All humans are mammals. Okay, so the middle term here is bearers of live young. Now, is it valid, yes or no? Okay, hearing some conflicting answers here. It's true, but still invalid. Because the premises don't necessarily guarantee the conclusion, right? So I never said all bearers of live young, or I never said no bearers, so it's not distributed, right? So the conclusion just happens to be true. But I could have come up with something incredibly false, like all fish are bearers of live young, and they would have been all humans are fish, which is incorrect, obviously. So, as you can see, this is all really fun. I love doing this. This is great. Okay. Yes? Yeah, so if you said all bearers of live young are mammals, yes, so that would make it valid because you would be distributing bearers of live young to every individual. So, yep, so a lot of them, like these, you can just fix it maybe by kind of switching it around, but, I was just kind of messing with you on this one, so. Okay, all right, so Another one. All humans are blonde. All blondes are drivers of red cars. All humans are drivers of red cars. Okay, is this one valid? Yes or no? Okay, I'm seeing some no's. It is valid, but it's not sound. It's not actually true, right? So what I'm trying to get you to understand here is kind of the distinction between validity and soundness, right? So valid just means it follows the right form. So if you look at this, our middle term is blondes. Blondes is distributed, because we say all blondes. And so therefore, it is a valid syllogism, even though it's obviously not true, so that makes it not sound. Okay. And then the other rule that I mentioned was if something's distributed in the conclusion, it has to be distributed in the premise. So here we have all humans are drivers of red cars, and then yes, it's distributed in the premise where it occurs. So all humans are blonde. So those are kind of the two biggest rules that people mess up on. I actually accidentally created one of them as a fallacy when I was writing the example. So even when I was practicing this after taking this class, I still messed up on that. But I have an appointment for confession. It's all good. Okay. Oh, this one doesn't have the animation, but okay. Here's another example. So all philosophers are crazy. Some humans are philosophers. Some humans are crazy. So is the middle term distributed? Yes or no? Yes. So philosophers is the middle term. It's distributed. And then there's nothing distributed in the conclusion. So yeah, it's valid. Okay. So there's a couple other rules. These don't come up as much, but are also important. So both the premises can't be negative. So you can't say like no philosophers or something, no humans or something. You can't draw a conclusion from that because you're not asserting anything about anything. And both of them can't be particular, some. So you always have to have an all or a no in there somewhere to get a syllogism because you're basically making some kind of universal statement about something. Okay. Now, so the weakness of Aristotelian logic, as you can see, is that it doesn't really fit in individuals. So it never really says, you know, it doesn't say Billy Joel, it doesn't say, it's always all or some. So it always talks about groups of people. So this is where sentential logic comes in. So in sentential logic is always P implies Q. So one thing applies to other, so you can use individual. So you can say if Billy Joel does this, then this will happen, and so on and so forth. Okay, so the first type of sentential logic, so there's a few different types, is conjunction. So this is an example of conjunction. We're told that John is coming to the party and Jane is coming to the party. And this is really useful because if I can prove to you in some way that John is coming to the party, then I've proven to you that Jane is also coming. So very useful. Therefore, if John is coming, then Jane must be coming. Okay. Disjunction. So disjunction is either John is coming to the party or Jane is coming. This is useful because if I can prove to you that one of them is coming, I've proven to you the other one is not coming, and vice versa. So if Jane is coming, we know that John is not coming. Okay. All right, so hypothetical syllogism. So this one's pretty common, pretty useful. We use it all the time. So it says, if the first, then the second. If the second, then the third. If the first, then the third, right? So pretty typical, if you look at any kind of argument, you'll see something kind of like this. You're trying to kind of tie two ends to another and use some kind of connection to show that they follow chronologically. So, for example, if their best player is out, the football team will lose the game. If the football team loses their game, they will not make the playoffs. Therefore, if the best player is out, the team will not make the playoffs. So you can kind of see how this follows logically. All right. So now we have modus ponens. So these are Latin names, basically. So this says, if the first, then the second, the first. Therefore, the second. So pretty simple. For example, so say that you're a school teacher and your class is taking a math test. And the teacher, she sees this one boy that is looking down the whole time. He's not looking at his test paper. So she comes up with the premise in her head that he might be looking at a calculator. If he's using a calculator, she says, then he is cheating. She sees him with a calculator. So therefore, he cheated. So this is an example of kind of how modus ponens works. And also with these, they can be valid or invalid. There are also fallacies with this in the next one that I'm going to. So this one is valid, right? So this is a typical form. Okay, this is an interesting case. So if you use a calculator test and he cheated, however, she finds out that she looks at his test. There's no work for all the problems he did, but he got all the right answers. He got 100. Therefore, she concludes, he must have cheated. Therefore, he must have used a calculator on the test. Is this valid? Okay, use some mixed answers again. Invalid, yes. So the reason is because just because he cheated doesn't mean he necessarily used a calculator. She never saw for sure. So this one is really interesting, and it's really important in things like science, right? Because a scientist, he makes a hypothesis, and he expects certain conclusions. So he always uses sort of a modus ponens type of argument. P implies Q. So he might say, if this variable occurs in the experiment, I'm going to get this result. Then he gets that result, but that doesn't guarantee that it was that factor that gave him the result. So just because he cheated, he could have cheated in a number of ways. He could have memorized the answers from a previous test. He could have copied off of somebody else's paper. So we don't know for sure that he used a calculator. Okay. So this is called the fallacy of affirming the consequent. Okay. So the next one is called modus tollens. So modus tollens is sort of a via negativa, sort of a negative way of proving the same thing. So if the first, then the second. Not the second. Therefore, not the first. So, dang it. Okay. So, for example, say that the teacher walks around and she doesn't notice, but there's another teacher in the room who says that she did not see him cheat whatsoever. Therefore, if we know for a fact that he didn't cheat, we can conclude he did not use a calculator, because using a calculator means cheating. So, or let's say we know that he didn't use a calculator. So the teacher, she didn't see him well enough. She saw that he didn't have a calculator. And so because he didn't have a calculator, she concludes he didn't cheat. So is this valid? Okay, you guys are catching on. This is invalid, okay? And the reason is the same as before. He could have used other means of cheating. Okay. So this is the fallacy of denying the antecedent. All right. Okay. So now sentential logic, like I said, I'll get to that in a second. So sentential logic, it works for individuals really well. So like I gave you a particular circumstance with a particular teacher. So it works really well with those. However, the downside of sentential logic is you can connect anything with anything. So I can tell you that if water pours evenly on the ground, then the earth is flat. Water does pour evenly on the ground. Therefore, the earth is flat. Now, is this valid? Okay, some mixed answers. It is valid, yeah. But again, as I said earlier, it's not sound, it's not true. But it follows logically the correct way. So this is a modus ponens. If water pours evenly on the ground, then the earth is flat. Water does pour evenly on the ground, therefore the earth is flat. Okay. So that's kind of sentential logic, kind of its weaknesses and strengths. Now, this is one of the more fun things, I think. This is informal fallacies. So informal fallacies are things that they don't formally break the rules, as I said, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily true or false. And the funny thing about informal fallacies is that we kind of commit them on a daily basis, a lot of times without using it. And they're for sure in tons of, media articles and television and everything like that. So let's look at some of the examples of them. So the first one is called the appeal to the majority. So this is when the majority thinking something true or false is used as a reason to show that it's true. And we use this all the time. We'll say, "Oh, well, everybody's doing it," or everyone's saying this. So for example, all of the experts are saying the Boston Celtics are going to win it all this year. However, it's not necessarily true. Just because the majority believes it doesn't mean it's actually going to happen, right? So another one we have is called subjectivism. So this one is when one's own beliefs are used as a reason to make something true. So it kind of assumes that your mind and your own thoughts are infallible. Now, I had a funny moment this year, because during the time that I was taking this class, I wanted to go visit Belmont Abbey. So Belmont Abbey is where I started college my freshman year. And one of my friends, he told me that Belmont Abbey was having their spring formal while I was going to be there, just by coincidence. But the only problem was you have to be a Belmont Abbey student to go to the Belmont Abbey formal, the spring formal. But my friend called me and he said, "Hey, I know you're coming and I have an extra ticket. Do you want to come?" And I was like, "Okay, yeah, sure." And but he was kind of saying, "Well, do you think they're going to care that you're not a Belmont Abbey student and everything?" And I was like, "You know what? In my mind, I still believe that I'm a Belmont Abbey student because I only left for seminary and everything like that." So this is, fortunately, an example of subjectivism. So just because I consider myself a Belmont Abbey student, unfortunately, it doesn't mean that I actually am. But nevertheless, I still went into the formal and I had a great time and nobody knew about it. So, not necessarily true. Okay. So this is called an ad hominem argument. So the Latin means to the man, something like that. And so this is when one's private character is used as a reason to say that their argument is false. So you might make an argument, and I would say something about you, discrediting you. For example, Martin Heidegger was part of the Nazi Party. Surely he couldn't have been a very good philosopher. Now, there may be some merit to this, but it's not necessarily true. It doesn't necessarily mean, just because he was a bad guy, it doesn't necessarily mean his arguments are wrong. But we use this example all the time in politics. People are always calling each other names and everything like that. So it's pretty common, but not necessarily true. And then we have the appeal to emotion. So this is pretty common as well. And this is when anyone's emotions are used as a reason to show that something's true. So this covers all the range of emotions. It could be anger, pity, fear, sadness, all those types of things. So, for example, the parent of a kid might tell their teacher, "Well, I know you never showed up to class all semester, but sometimes the poor kid deserves a second chance." Now, obviously, maybe it's sad. I don't know what happened to the kid. But it's not necessarily true that the teacher should give them a second chance, right? This was the same example that my professor used. And so this actually happened to him like a couple times. And he had no mercy for those kids whatsoever. And he pointed at one of the seminarians in the class, and he said, "You're in the business of mercy. I'm in the business of justice." So that was the kind of thing we had on a day-to-day basis in the class. So this is a post hoc argument. So this one's kind of fun as well. When one's event proceeding from another is a reason to show that something's true. For example, I was late to work the day the Chiefs won the Super Bowl. Therefore, the Chiefs only win when I'm late. So we say this all the time. Usually it's jokingly, but sometimes, we get kind of superstitious with it. It happens all the time and not necessarily true. So wrapping up here. False alternatives. So this is when only two options are given for something, but there are clearly others. For example, survey question. Do you, A, support government aid for the poor, or B, want them all to starve in the streets? So as you can see, you can kind of skew a lot of data, a lot of polls with these types of things. because you're getting people to choose one or the other when obviously there are a lot of other alternatives than having them starve in the streets. So it's not necessarily only those two logical options. And red herring. So this one, also very common in politics, giving an answer to a question that may be related but doesn't answer the question. So a lot of times when people are being interviewed, anything like that, this type of thing will happen. So here's an example. Governor, would you send your kids to public school? Answer, schooling is an important decision to be made by each individual couple. Now notice he kind of gave an answer that's kind of related. You probably buy it, but he didn't answer the question. He never said whether or not he would actually send his kids to public school. So, doesn't answer the real question. And so that is my last slide there. But yeah, so this was just a great course that I took. This is most of the material, like I said. The rest of it is just kind of a skill that you learn, figuring out if these syllogisms are valid or invalid. And yeah, I just hope that maybe you can kind of get a jump start, get interested, and maybe next time that you see an argument in an article or someone's arguing with you, you can stop for just a second and think about kind of what type of argument they're making and whether or not it's really a valid argument or not. And with that, truth is real, as these types of logic rely upon. People will never be able to get rid of logic altogether. So let's continue to always search for the truth and nothing but the truth. Thank you. Okay. So this time, if you guys have any questions, you can go ahead and ask me. Yeah, Carol. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and I think that's why this course is so important, so that we can kind of think about these things for ourselves, and not just what people are saying, but really think about, like, does this make sense or not, right? So, yes. So where it comes from is that apparently back in the day when people, I guess when they were being chased by dogs, they would throw off the scent of the dog by throwing a red herring on the ground, and that would distract the dog. So yeah, it's all about distraction. You throw something one way and avoid being attacked directly. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? Sure, yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Okay, wow. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things a professor would always say with the informal fallacies was true but irrelevant, right? So you might be saying that something's true, like maybe he's giving you some false answers, but it might actually not actually answer the question. He said he uses that in arguments with his wife all the time. I don't know how that goes, but Yeah, it must be hard being married to a logic professor. Any other questions? Any question? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
So, what would you call the art of the politician who never can answer the question he's asked, but only answer the question you want to answer? Which happens all the time.
Yeah, well,
And do they have a class?
no, not necessarily. I guess this is as close as you get, but yeah, I mean, they're smart. I mean, they know what they're doing a lot of the time. I'm sure they've had someone told them to do that before at some point or another. But yeah, you should just tell them, true but irrelevant. Give me the real answer. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah, and that comes from a lot of things. I mean, just our way that we don't appreciate truth anymore. A lot of times people kind of say anything for whatever's convenient. But I like what you said about, words sometimes just don't mean anything anymore. That's the case, yeah. Did anybody have any questions about just kind of seminary in general? Maybe something from the handout? Yeah. Good. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, good. Yeah. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. All right, any last questions? All right, thank you guys again.